Just want to welcome everybody to our 2020 Regional Assembly. It's so interesting that the theme for this assembly was decided upon towards the end of last year, having no clue of what 2020 was going to look like or be like, but it just feels like the Spirit's guidance that we are better together. And we're hearing that phrase in a lot of different ways in our culture and in our churches. But it's not just a catchy phrase for us. It's built on the Ecclesiastes passage that two are better than one. And we're thankful that we're in community together, we're in covenant together. And so this officially kicks off our regional assembly. Welcome to each one of you, and welcome Kirby as our first presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We're delighted to have Kirby with us. Her presence and the topic came out of requests from pastors. Yeah, we heard you and heard concerns and thought of solutions. And of course, Kirby is usually the solution to many questions that come regarding investments and proper stewardship finances in your congregation. And then this is almost a micro topic, even though we'll certainly go broader in general on church trustees. You know, do they have complete authority to manage all the accounts, or where's the accountability, and where does the pastor fit in? So those and other questions, I will be quiet myself and invite Kirby. Such a blessing. She participates in so many things that have nothing to do with Christian Church Foundation in our region, just because she's our regional partner, and a blessing to our region and some others here in the Midwest. So thank you, Kirby.
Great. My pleasure. Thank you for this maiden voyage for the Regional Assembly. Appreciate the invitation. And it's a great topic, I think, that one we really don't talk about very much, and one that probably just a handful of people in the church deal with. So we're going to peel back some of the onion layers and get into some real specifics about the key role of endowment fund trustees. As Paul mentioned, we're going to keep everybody muted, and so I can get through the slides. Hopefully we can get through the slides in about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back together, and if there's specific questions that you want to ask as a group, that's fine. If Paul sees a need for some clarification while I'm presenting, he'll let me know. And then also, I've got lots of packets and materials that I'll be glad to ship to you or link you to our website or other places, other things. So don't hesitate to reach out if there's some specific things that we can help you with once we're done with our time together. So here we go. This is my first time to ever have my screen shared, so we'll see what happens. All right, can everybody see this? Paul, give me a nod if everybody can see it. Okay, great. And this is weird because I can't see you all. So I'm going to be looking at my my video camera here, and hope that everybody is going to be with us for the duration. So we call this best practices for endowment funds trustees. And so what we're dealing with here is what we call the area of the stewardship of accumulated resources. And it's churches that it's not a matter of if somebody's going to die and leave you in their will, it's a matter of when. I don't know how many times I've been to churches and visiting with the minister and says, oh, you know, nobody in our church is ever going to leave us any money. We're a poor church. We don't have anything. People won't be giving. And, you know, 6 months later, I get a call and I said, you know what? We got our first bequest. What do we do now? So we want to help churches who don't have endowments or don't have these policies in place to get ready, because having policies and documents will help fend off a lot of problems and issues that could come later on. I'm dealing right now with 2 churches up in Iowa. Within 6 weeks, I got a call from each church and said, we have no idea who this person is. We don't know if this person ever came to church, if they were a friend of somebody, if they went to Sunday school 50 years ago. These out of the blue bequests that have just dropped in their laps. So you never know. It could come from somebody within the church. It could come from somebody from outside the church. So just thinking in terms of just general best practices for finances in your church. A lot of things that we need to look at and be aware of. Obviously, we're going to talk today about the endowment fund, but also churches that have memorial gift policies. You know, when you get the gift from when somebody dies, what are you going to use it for or spend it on? You may get special gifts that kind of come at the end of the year from people that really don't care what you do with it. Do you put it in the budget? Do you put it in the endowment fund? Do you put it on the roof fund? Whatever. Do you have policies that kind of guide and direct that? And then areas of reserve funds, you know, the set aside monies for the R&R, the repair and replacement, et cetera. And just general record keeping, financial review. A lot of churches think that they need to have an audit, but those are very expensive. But every few years, the church should have a financial review. And then a really important document I think a lot of people don't think about is conflict of interest policy. So for example, if you've got somebody in your church that is investing all of the funds of the congregation, that may not be a bad thing, but is he or she benefiting from that that work that they're doing on behalf of the church? Just signing a simple conflict of interest statement that says we identify this, it could be a possible conflict, and everybody, it's up front, it's on up above board. I serve on four different nonprofit boards, and every single one of them have a conflict of interest policy. 3 of them invest with the foundation, so I have to fully disclose that there could be a conflict, but we just disclose it up front. To help you in this quest, there is one of the best kept secrets, and I'm not sure, I can't see what I'm holding up here. A handbook for treasurers of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. This has been a work that is updated several times each year, or every several years it's updated, put together with Pension Fund, Church Extension. Bruce Barkauer has added some things. Unfortunately, it's pretty out of date. But if you want to send me your email, I can link you to our website, and so you can download this, share it with your financial people, your treasurer, and others to talk about best practices in financial, how to deal with finances in your church. So what is the purpose of an endowment fund? An endowment fund, once set aside and invested, can provide an ongoing stream of income to support the ministry of your church. It can provide fund for ministry both today and for the future generations. So not only are you, those of us sitting around this screen, able to benefit from the income, but those who come behind us will have that opportunity to benefit from the income coming to the church. It can provide stability. A lot of churches right now need that income stability, having that extra stream of income for their budget purposes if they have to use it for budget. And finally, probably more important, is it provides a place for people in your congregation to leave their legacy. When we talk about end of life giving, when people say, I love this church and I want to find some way to give beyond my lifetime. So an endowment fund provides that opportunity for people to do. So what is the policy? Why is it important to have a policy? 2 very important things. One, it can avoid conflict. And I know many of you probably have sat in a room where you get this bequest out of the blue and with no policy, and everybody has their idea about how Mabel Jones wanted us to spend her money. It avoids conflict. A policy in place, you know what's going to happen with those bequests. Policy outlines specific duties for the trustees, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But from a donor's point of view, think of somebody sitting out in the pulpit and out in a pew, or as we right now out in their own home, in their own living room. And maybe he or she has been thinking about their estate plan, and maybe their attorney said, do you want to leave anything to charity? And you think, golly, maybe I want to leave something to my church, but what are they going to do with it? Do I know what the leadership is going to do? Do I trust them to do what I tell them I would like to have done with this gift? So the donor really wants trust, and they want transparency. They want to know what you're going to do with the dollars that they may leave to you, because this is a forever gift. Then they want to know, while they're still living, that it's going to be handled appropriately. So what is a policy? Policy provides direction for a variety of things, what the congregation should do with donations. It will distinguish between a donor restricted gift and unrestricted gifts, and we're going to talk more specifically about that here in just a minute. It'll say who administers the fund. Is it a committee? Is it your actual trustees? Is this the stewardship department? Who is it that's going to administer the funds? It'll say how the income will be generated and how it will be donated, where it will be. Will go to the scholarship committee or the building fund or wherever around the church those dollars can be distributed. And unfortunately, we also have to have a piece in there that says what happens if the congregation decides to end its visible ministry. In the model policy, again, I hope that you can see this. We have a model policy that we provide for churches on a template that you can go in and put the specific things for how this would affect your church. But unfortunately, there is a termination clause that says if we cease to exist or cease to be affiliated with the Disciples of Christ, what are we going to do with this endowment fund? Now, we at the foundation don't want to tell you what to do, but we feel like every church should have that policy in place that says, with the unfortunate demise of a church, what's going to happen to those dollars. So, purpose of the trustees. The trustees have to be those who are the caretakers for those gifts. They have to serve as the trusted individuals in the congregation that will oversee and manage these gifts. They have to emphasize the importance of legacy gifts and the church's desire to be responsible fiduciary of these gifts. That's a mouthful of a word, but you as a fiduciary have legal, moral obligations to those gifts, to the church and to the donors. It's not just who can we round up on who can the nominating committee find this year to be a trustee? There really needs to be some care and thought into the selection of those individuals. More purposes is to keep files and documents of all estate gifts received by the church. There is a church in another state that has a multi-million-dollar endowment. And when it comes time to finding the documents for some of these gifts, they're not able to find them. They've been buried. And so we want to make sure that churches always keep those documents up to date in a file. We at the foundation can actually back up those documents for you. You certainly don't want them just kept in a paper file. Get them on a CD, get them on a flash drive. And you can actually share those with the foundation, and we will keep those in our offsite record keeping place as well. Keep donor restricted gifts separate from unrestricted and board restricted gifts. Did I say that? Keep donor restricted gifts separate from unrestricted and donor restricted gifts. We're going to talk more specifically about this, but again, basically Mabel Jones dies, and if she says my gift is coming to you unrestricted, here's my tithe, my 10% First Christian Church, period. The church can decide what to do with that. But if Mabel Jones says, I want this gifts for scholarships for camps, you need to segregate those funds and keep them to where you can track those individually, the investment and the purpose and the use of those funds. Very, very important. And keep minutes and records of meetings on file and make sure these are passed on to future trustees. In my 23 years, almost 23 years with the foundation, I cannot tell you how many times I have walked into the meeting with the trustees, and the only thing some of them show up with is a pen. There's no documents, there's no notebook, there is nothing. One church, they said, well, we don't have a policy. And I opened my file and I said, well, here's the policy you adopted 6 years ago. So it's incredibly important to pass this brain trust of what you have learned as a trustee on to the next trustees who will sit around the table with you. So very important to keep good records and to pass those records on. So what are some qualifications of endowment fund trustees? You'd probably think that, well, we need to have all the bankers and all the CPAs and all the lawyers and all the brokers and all the insurance people. I almost said guys, guys and gals. They all need to be endowment fund trustees. But I think there's some more essential qualifications that we need to look at first. And so on the right-hand side, you see that you first need to look at trusted and respected members of the congregation, people who are of integrity, who provide good leadership skills, and those who love the church, very important. And those people who can exhibit qualities of trustworthiness and transparency. It's kind of like, the Boy Scout oath, whatever that is. They really have to be true to their mission of what they're doing to uphold these important tenets for the church. So some of those preferred qualities or qualifications, yeah, you probably want a banker or a CPA, somebody that understands finance, can read a financial statement, and maybe knows something about investing. Those are important skills. But also, again, those people with the depth of experience and passion for the church's ministry. So Somebody that's been a member of the church for maybe 6 months or so may not be the best trustee. Maybe somebody that has more of the long-term involvement and love of the congregation. People maybe have some experience in communications. How do you communicate a financial statement? Kind of long and boring that it can be at some time. So somebody that has more communicative good skills can be a good person to be as a trustee. And again, this openness to mentor and encourage other members of the congregation to think about their own legacy gifts as well. So the duties of the trustees, and I think these are illuminated to some degree in our boilerplate policy, to prepare at least annually the report for the congregation about the funds and the investments, to review the endowment investment performance, very important, to perform due diligence on the investment manager. So even churches that have their investments placed with the foundation, about every three years, they need to call us and they need to review us as their manager to make sure that we are providing the important and the correct services to them, that they understand the investments, they understand who we are investing in. So you as trustees with funds with the foundation, you need to do your due diligence on the foundation. Review the policy every now and then. There's maybe a few updates here and there. Maybe you've changed from the church board to the ministry council. So maybe those little things that need to be updated in some of your policies, that's important. And then these other things, again, getting to the idea of how do we encourage new people to think about the church and their legacy planning. So encourage legacy gifts through your own personal witness. Schedule legacy giving seminars, review and update marketing materials. And if you need help with marketing, I collect brochures from churches. And believe me, there is nothing that's original. You can beg, borrow, and steal any of the lingo and the language from any of these churches' brochures. And I'll be happy to share those with you. So don't think that you're going to have to develop all of this from scratch. We are here to reach out and be helpful and walk with you in this process. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we may honor those who have died and left the church in their will, or those who may have said while they're still living, checked a box and said, I have the church in my will. How do we honor and recognize those people, maybe specifically through an All Saints Day recognition? So if you ignore all of my other 21 slides, this is probably the most important slide you need to understand and you need to take to heart and take back to your church leadership. When somebody dies, and this is also when even a living gift, but we're really focusing on these end-of-life gifts. If somebody dies and leaves the church a contribution, it's going to come you are going to handle it in one of three ways. One is Mabel Jones says, I give and bequeath 10% of my estate to First Christian Church, period. She has given no restrictions on that gift. The church can take that gift and do anything they want with it. Now, if your endowment fund policy, though, says all unrestricted bequests go into the endowment fund, then now that gift becomes board restricted because your leadership has said unrestricted gifts goes into the endowment fund. So you are just following whatever you have set forth in your endowment fund to handle that gift. Now, that means the board can unrestrict it as well. And one of the pieces of our policy is an amendment procedure. So if something goes crazy or haywire and the church needs to change things in the policy, it does allow through board action to change and make changes to the policy. But if Mabel Jones gives you a donor restricted gift and her gift says, I give and bequeath 10% of my estate to First Christian Church to be held as an endowment and only the income can be spent, then you need to separate Mabel Jones's gift and start a different fund, a new fund, because now you have a restriction. So even though your current endowment fund is endowed and you're only using the income for various things of the church, you also now have an endowment of Mabel Jones. If you put Mabel Jones's bequest inside your endowment fund and then you go back to amend the policy, you're going to have to pull Mabel Jones's money back out of there and keep a separate record of Mabel Jones's requests and keep that endowed. She may also just say, I have a specific use, and maybe she says, I want the income only to be spent for camp scholarships. So you really have to keep these donor designated gifts separate and accounted for out of the strictures of what your endowment fund might be. So it's so important for you to keep that in mind. Another thing is, Mabel may say, here's 10% of my estate for camp scholarships. She didn't say endowment. She didn't say income only. You could take that $25,000 and give it all away in 1 year to camp scholarships. So that is, again, why record keeping is so very important on all of these gifts. That's a mouthful, but this is so important for everyone to understand and recognize. So, more duties of your endowment fund trustees. If we haven't run off the trustees yet, here's a little bit more to think about. Maintain the permanent files and preserve the original gift and the bequest language. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. You must keep those records, and you must pass those records on to future trustees, and you must keep them in a very safe place. One of the regions that I work with, years ago, I think the donor died in 1962. I finally saw a copy of her death certificate, of all things, and a copy of her will. And her will basically just said, this money can be used to start new churches in this area of the country. She didn't say endowed. So she gave this region the full opportunity to spend any of it at any time on new churches, or they could endow it. Right now, they have chosen to keep it endowed and are using the income for new church ministry. But at any time, they could go into that fund and say, this donor said we could spend it, and they could apply all of that money onto the project of a new church. So you've got to understand the language in those bequests and follow them to the T. I was visiting with the new treasurer over in the Kansas region over in Topeka. She just retired and has been a longtime member of one of the churches. And she says, I've learned in this job, one of the most important things is that trust is not an internal control. So I don't care if your trustees or your financial folks are saying, oh, just trust me. Just trust me. What I'm telling you is the truth. Just trust me. No, I want to see it in black and white. I want to see it in writing. I want to see it in a book. Don't assume that trust is can be a good thing in how you're trying to determine the controls in your church. This is like the financial secretary who will just bag up all the cash and checks and take them home and count the money. Oh, trust me, it'll be fine. Nothing's going to happen to me on the way home with this bag of money. That's another whole conversation we can have. Okay, what is wrong with this policy statement? I think I'm going to guess even back as early in the 1960s, churches were starting to write these policies and put them into place. And pretty soon, another church would say, well, what is your policy like? And they would just copy and paste. And there'd just be this copy and paste of all these policies, which was fine because, again, nothing is really, don't have to try to rewrite things from scratch. Use what's out there and being utilized with other churches. But the problem is when this piece of a policy got cut and pasted into too many policies, we started realizing that a lot of churches had a problem. So I'm going to read this out loud, and obviously I'm going to answer for you, give you the answer to this. But if this is actually, I lifted this from a church in Missouri. I hope this church is not on right now. I can't see who's on. They probably have already fixed it and changed it, but this is a policy in one of the documents. If the designated purpose has already been achieved, the bequest will, upon advice of legal counsel, recommendation of the stewardship department, approval of the board of directors, and approval of the majority of the congregation present and voting, be considered to be an undesignated bequest. This is wrong on so many points. It's wrong legally and it's wrong morally, and we're going to talk about why. So people will say, well, we got this bequest from Mabel Jones. I hope nobody has Mabel Jones in their church because she's getting used a lot. It was just a good name to come up with. Mabel Jones's bequest said that it was to be used to purchase property north of the church to build a family life center. But Mabel Jones died, and we already bought that property, and we already built we built the Family Life Center, but now we're trying to buy property to the south of the church to build a basketball court or whatever. So you're saying, are we stuck? Do we have to, can we not use that money? Well, no. Restrictions can be changed. Yes, there is a silver lining here, that bequests can be changed. So if a bequest has restrictions the church cannot follow, the law of the land is called the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, lovingly called UPMIFA, and it does allow for restrictions to be modified under certain circumstances. But guess what? There is only one person in the state of Missouri who can change that, and his name is Eric Schmidt, who is the state attorney general for Missouri. Only he or she can stand in the shoes of a deceased donor and apply these bequests in ways that what we call the CPRES document, that's a French word, SCYPRES, that means as near as possible. So you write a letter to Eric Schmidt and say, you know, this is what Mabel Jones's will said. We can't buy the property to the north, but we would like to apply this gift to buy the property to the south. So as long as you follow the rules of how you can unrestrict these gifts, it is possible. And I will tell you that we at the Christian Church Foundation can provide you guidance and assistance to help in this matter. We have some template letters. We've helped a number of churches. Most recently, we helped the region of Kansas. In 1974, somebody gave $200 to start a seminary scholarship loan program. Didn't go very far, and they've held on to this all these years. So we were able to send a letter to the Attorney General in Kansas to release those restrictions and just put those money in the region's general scholarship fund. So it is possible, but just make sure you follow the rules and follow the correct way in making these changes. So also a part of UPMIFA is some language that talks about the prudent investor rule. Though any of you have been around a long time, this used to be called the prudent man rule. So it's just been updated a little bit to call it the prudent investor rule. It's basically a way for churches, colleges, universities, trusts, nonprofit organizations, anybody who manages somebody else's money. It shows them how to be a good manager of those assets and those resources. So we talk about diversification because that's fundamental to managing risk. Risk and return, you got to can we be a little more risky so we can get a little better return? You have to analyze those things. Duties, trustees have a duty to avoid fees and costs and other expenses. A prudent investor has to have a fiduciary duty of impartiality. So it's like I am going to retire 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so my goal of my IRA investing is different than me as a trustee as a church, because the church has a forever timeline. We have to be impartial on how we choose these investments based on for whom we're investing it for, in this case, the local congregation. Trustees have a duty to delegate investment decisions. So you may not have the people sitting around your table buying and selling stocks, but rather letting those decisions be at an outside organization, again, such as the Christian Church Foundation can be that manager for you. And then portfolios should be examined as a whole rather than specific investments in isolation. There is a possibility that you can be too prudent on one side and be considered imprudent. So to say all of our funds are invested in CDs is not prudent, because you're not garnering in a gain to provide money for ministry. On the other hand, you don't want 100% in gold bars, because that's imprudent on the speculative side. So there's got to be a good balance of funds and how those are invested for the ultimate benefit of the church. So more things about if you are a particular church that have investments with us, with the foundation, we encourage you to review your quarterly statements and make sure your trustees receive those. Subscribe to our monthly emails that report the fund performance. I think that just came out yesterday. Those of you who are have funds with us probably got that in your inbox. Oh boy, I emboldened this. You do not update your authorized signatures. constantly and as much as needed. I have a church up in Nebraska. It was dated 1987. I swear to God, I kid you not. And one person was still a good trustee on that list. I said, maybe it's time we get this updated. And sure enough, as soon as a church begins needing to make changes to the documents or the investments or wants to take a distribution, we must have those signature cards updated. And even if you don't have an investment foundation, you've got accounts at the bank or with Edward Jones or whoever, really stay on top of those authorized signature cards. I encourage you to get familiar with our website and our Facebook page. There's all sorts of marketing ideas. You can cut and paste and share that on your own Facebook page. We also do a quarterly newsletter called Out of Abundance. We're trying to move away from the printed version of that. So anybody, not just those of you who invest with us, you're welcome to sign up for that and receive that in your inbox once a quarter. The last couple of slides, just want to talk again about encouraging new gifts. A lot of churches say, well, we're just going to wait until, we're just hoping and praying that when so-and-so dies, she's got us in her will, versus utilizing what we call a mentoring model that encourages people while they're living to be able to share with others the fact, I have the church in my will, and I encourage you or invite you to consider to do the same thing. So this legacy giving ministry does more than raise funds for the church's future needs. It allows individuals to leave an ongoing legacy and witness of their relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm going to guess that many people, maybe most people in your congregations, are receiving in their mailbox solicitations from University of Missouri Foundation, from Culver Stockton, from United Way, from Red Cross, and say, wouldn't you like to leave us in your will? Wouldn't you like to perpetuate the ministry of the Red Cross by giving a gift when you die? But yet we as the church, we fail to make that invitation. We fail to reach out and encourage people to think about the church as to where that legacy can go. We need to be more bold in making the ask and really providing those opportunities for them. So some of the keys to this mentoring model, the keys to success: we must have a supportive pastor involved. The church leadership must be engaged at the top level, the board and the trustees especially. Provide educational seminars. There should be a lot of promotion and follow-up. Obviously, the policy has to be key and in place, and that's why these brochures are so important. So you can hand this to one of your people and say, this is what the Endowment Fund is doing, and we would like to invite you to become a part of the legacy of this church with your own gift. And then consider what we would call like a legacy circle or a building circle or a legacy partner, some sort of club, as it were, that you can invite people to check a box that says, yes, I have the church in my will. And invite them to gatherings, invite them to help promote this culture of generosity. Recognize them. Maybe you put their names in a brochure. Maybe you recognize them on All Saints Day. Of course, this is after they would pass. And it just proliferates this whole giving begats giving. I love that saying. Any of you, of course, who remember our dear beloved Saint Fred Craddock, the church that he helped start, which is going to pop in my mind here in a moment, that the church said, Fred, we really should start this legacy program, start an endowment fund. He was dead set against it. Well, they went over his head, and I'm sorry, jokingly, of course, that was an easy thing to do, but they had a policy. They started encouraging people. We recognized this church a few years ago at the dinner at our General Assembly. And at that time, they had 65 people in this tiny little church that had signed up and had decided to put the church in their will. It's an awesome story to tell. So, we're talking about that third pocket. We give from our annual pocket to the annual budget, but this is a way of encouraging people to give of their accumulated assets at the time of their passing. So the next steps in the mentoring model: do the brochure, schedule some of these initial events. That's kind of difficult right now. We're Zooming, but now is a great time to start making those plans. So when we do go back to live and in-person meetings and worship, you're ready to roll this out. Doing monthly newsletter articles, we can provide you those, worship bulletin inserts, Observe All Saints Day. It's a great time to recognize those givers and those people who have passed on. And testimonials are wonderful too. Those people that will say, this is why I've done what I've done, and I encourage others to do it as well. So the last slide. Again, if you're not a partner with us at the foundation, you don't have to be an expert on investing. We help walk that through with you. You can hear from our 5 funds that we offer. Everything from conservative to balanced to aggressive, that our funds are faith-based, they are socially responsible for your long-term investments, and especially then we work with this entire area of the stewardship of accumulated resources, legacy giving workshops, educational resources, and your policies. I go back to the fact that we will definitely help you write your policies, update your policies in whatever way we need to. So I will take a breath and take a drink of my coffee. Here's my contact information. If this disappears before you're able to take it down, Paul can get it emailed out to everybody. And I guess I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for any questions that may have come up or discussion. Again, I would hold that if you have something that's very personal or very specific to your church, other than if it might be helpful in sharing with the rest of the group, that you email me those privately and we can deal with that then. So, all right, Paul, I'm going to take it off of stop share and you can open up all the voices and see what kinds of comments or questions we might have. Everybody wake up now since I can see you again.
Thank you, Kirby. That was so wonderful and informative. And finance is, I think, very low on my interest and skill set generally, but you always make it so relevant and so exciting and just present opportunities on how to better minister in the church. So thank you so much. And Susan has just indicated that she'll gladly post the PowerPoint with the recording that you'll send to her along. That also includes her contact information. So thank you for sharing that with us. So any hands raised, digitally, virtually, or physically? Any comments?
And thank you. Cherry Log Christian Church. I can't believe I couldn't remember that in Georgia. That was Paul's church.
Yeah. I can't. Am I off mute?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. A question that has that I think I've heard of some other churches. Of course, our endowment has been set up decades ago. But two questions. If a person gives a gift that establishes an endowment for a small church or for a church that doesn't have an endowment policy currently in place, I'd heard that there have been some theories that a church might be best to say this money, cannot go on forever, that we want this endowment, this gift needs to be spent in 10 years or something like that. So I guess that's question number one. What is your opinion of those things? It seems like my church in Kansas may have a policy like that because they didn't want to build up a large, asset base. And then secondly, in regards to somebody like in our congregation where we've got a long-term policy set up, what are the consequences if a donor says, here's this large gift or small gift or whatever bequest, but I want it spent within X years? And maybe they designate it for a certain activity, maybe they don't, but how does that have to be handled differently from something that's just, joins in with the rest of the long-term endowment?
Yeah, those are good questions. And actually, I'm working with a church in Missouri right now to where they're debating the policy and says if our endowment fund gets to $500,000, we know that the income off of that $500,000 is going to be more than we really should be able to handle or spend in any given year. So anything over $500,000, we're just going to spend it immediately. I'm not saying that that's the foundation's way of thinking, but the thought is that, they call it maybe a Jubilee year. After 7 years, if there's an excessive amount of money that's built up in the endowment, we'll just spend it. So again, that's possible. And churches have that opportunity. again, the foundation would not be one to promote that for any given church. But again, the good question for Neil is that, you know, if the donor in his or her will says it has to be perpetual into perpetuity forever, you must segregate that out and you must follow the tenets of that bequest. You cannot change that bequest. But the endowment fund policy itself, you have the opportunity to change that if that's made up of unrestricted gifts. The other thing you said about spend in X amount of years, I will say, I think it would be okay to share that Hamilton Christian Church, when they closed, they did not start an endowment fund with their remaining assets. They have a very specific schedule that they're giving big chunks away every year. Now, the problem is in good investment years, the value of those funds started going up again. Probably this year in a down year, they want it all to go to zero. They say, we don't want this to be held on in perpetuity. We want these organizations that are benefiting from Hamilton to get those chunks of money now. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about that as well. Again, Christian Church Foundation would prefer that churches do the pure endowment, but churches have to understand whatever works best for their particular congregation.
Well, and I guess what I mean is if a donor gives money and says, you know, like in the case of Union Avenue, where we have a perpetual endowment, and they give money, they want it to be in the endowment fund, but they say that, you know, I want my portion spent, you know, within 10 years, just pick a number. I mean, so do you have to keep that separate? Or, I mean, can the same group manage it, or do you need to have it as a separate part of the account?
You know, as long as, excuse me, as long as you got somebody in there who's a good accountant and can account for those dollars separately, to me personally, since I'm not an accountant, I would just soon set up a separate named fund so that you can see the activity of that. I would say I would leave that up to your church's financial people on how they would choose to manage that internally.
Okay.
Other questions? I haven't bored you all. Oh, Ron Stair. Okay, Ron. I'll visit with you late in a minute, Ron. Good question. So, well, Ron, you don't mind. Is it okay if I answer your question, Ron? You're on mute.
Yeah, that's fine.
Ron serves 2 UCC churches. The joint investment trust that manages the disciples, all the disciples' dollars, has to be only takes dollars of anybody who's listed in the yearbook. See, I can see myself now. I can see anybody listed in the yearbook can invest in the foundation. So United Church of Christ churches could not invest with this, but I am certainly happy to meet with church leaderships in those congregations, even though we can't. There should be some UCC partners that would service Mid-America, I would hope. I just don't know who those people were, but Ron, now definitely I would be glad to help you out in any ways in this area.
Well, our church does have investments with the United Fund, I think is what it's called, which is UCC. But
gotcha.
I hadn't heard anything about endowments through them or anything like that.
Yeah. There's a lot of churches. There's a church up in Iowa that is Methodist, Presbyterian, and Disciple. So they have to spread their endowments out.
Oh.
So they have to give lip service to each of the denominations. So that's okay. I don't mind going up there. So Eileen, it's good to see you again. In a week. Yeah, Ron.
I'm wondering about best practice around the ask. There's a lot of ways that you can ask at a group level or a specific target population. I notice in your email, you have the question, have you remembered the church in your will? Those are all good things. But I'm wondering at the individual level, who should do the ask? Is it appropriate? And what language should be used? Should the minister be the one to sit down with someone that they know could be a potential donor, or should it be a trustee? And then what language should they use to just simply say, would you be open to remembering the church as
Yeah.
a legacy?
That's an excellent question, Ron. Excellent. The mentoring model really sort of addresses that. The peer-to-peer, I believe, is the best. So if there's one of the church that we recognize a lot is Sandy Springs Christian Church down in Georgia. There's a woman in the church that for whom this was her thing. She says, I am the committed driver. I will get in the driver's seat of this church, of this process, and I will do all I can to invite people into this process. So she would invite people at her where she lived in the fellowship area of her condominiums. She would invite some of the disciples women in for cookies and coffee on a Saturday afternoon. She would invite the leadership into her home for a 6-course meal. She would take the small groups and do the invitation in more of a peer-to-peer. I think it's a very delicate topic, as you know, and church people might say, oh, you just want to wait till I die and give you all my money. And that's really not what it's all about. It's the invitation to participate in something that's going to live on forever. So a lot of the ask can come just from providing the materials and providing the opportunity. I'm gonna give a shout out to Jay and Mona Stevenson. Back in October, they invited for two consecutive nights. They invited specific people, Jay. I think you really targeted some of the folks that you really wanted there so that they would hear the message and to encourage them to participate in the legacy planning for themselves. So, and every church has their own different personality, and you got to work the culture a little bit differently. I think pastors must be involved, but maybe pastors may not be the right person to do the ask unless they have that kind of intimate relationship with a person in the church to whom they are the only person. And then it becomes more of a pastoral care invitation. So Jay, you went off mute. You want to say anything?
I was just going to comment that we gave a plethora of opportunities and talked about all those opportunities that were available to our members. So it gave people a perspective of what is out there that they could use. I think a lot of the people that came to our 2 sessions were surprised at what the various opportunities were to give. So it worked out very well.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that Jay is probably one of the most committed drivers I have seen in a church in the work that he does at the church in Fayette. So shout out. He's got a great hospitality of a guest room. So nice to take advantage of that as well.
I heard through Christian Church Foundation a wonderful presentation of endowments and financial investments as an act of pastoral care and love for congregation. And I just always remember that context, because the concrete example is that if someone does not have a will, when you start basic level, have you even drafted a will? The response is, yes, you have drafted a will. You're saying, I wish all my assets to go to the United States government. Now, they may want that, but if they don't want the United States government to seize all their assets, then you're giving them an opportunity to perpetuate something that was near and dear to their life through giving to the church, or, like a perpetual tithe. If they always gave $20 a week, through their endowment, they can still give $20 a week long after they're gone, potentially. So thank you for bringing that up, Jay and Kirby.
I just came across that document. It's called The Last Will and Testament of William Woe, because he didn't plan and everything went to the government instead of his kids. And, it's in cheek, but unfortunately it's a lot of people in our pews right now.
And it's not fools, if you will. The examples is Chief Justice William Berger and John Wayne, and then Aretha Franklin, we found out, to not leave a will. It's just.
Absolutely. Well, in Kansas City, Derek Thomas, he had 7 children with 5 different women, no wives, but he sired 7 kids with 5 women, and he died with no will. Yeah. Don't be like Derek Thomas.
Right. Friends, we have about 5 minutes left. We do want to honor your time, and then we said we will aim to conclude at noon. So if there are any other questions that you wish to be addressed before we dismiss. Don, unmute yourself.
We go. Okay, yeah, just a quick note. When I was at Garden City, Kansas, we had a board of trustees, and they were over quite a few things. They really were. And my simple word there would be, there was some farmland, there was all kinds of things related, and that needed to be a core of people that knew what they were doing. And so they were there. But one of the insights, which I think we'd all assume this, but still to practice, would be have Kirby or someone that comes and just meets with them sometimes, just touching base on things that are going on, and that could be on a yearly basis or whatever. But I think many times when Kirby came, if not every time, trustees were really happy that she was there. And it gives us a chance that there's something maybe that's not quite in place. There's a chance to kind of look at that and reflect on it. So I guess that's the input I'd have. And Kirby was a lot of help to us in that setting. So you can mute me again. Okay.
Don, I hate to say this, but I have sometimes used Garden City, not by name, as one of the churches who had those 3 trustees that kept everything very private, very, I would say, confidential. They kept everything very close to the chest, and it took a lot of years to kind of pull back and allow the church to really know what was going on there. So
right.
A lot of heartache and a lot of tears over some of those visits we had out in Western Kansas.
Yeah.
I'd just like to echo that. We had a case here in Brookfield where an individual wanted to donate a small farm. And it was prudent on our behalf not to just simply accept that, but to get, as it were, kind of a third-party person. And so we brought Kirby in to visit with this individual, look at his finances, make sure everything was above board, that we weren't creating any kind of conflict of interest. And she was very helpful in helping us make that happen. And the church really benefited from that.
Gosh, I remember that was a long time ago, but I remember that.
Real blessing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kirby.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kirby, and thank you, everybody, for your participation today. And as a reminder, Susan will gladly post the slides that Kirby presented along with the recording to get her explanation and some of the chats. And as Ron said at the beginning, this is the grand debut of our Better Together Thursdays, which we had so many willing participants. We're going clear to the middle of October, maybe beyond. So please consult the update for information on what's coming up next. And this is part of our regional assembly. Regional assembly is different this year, and we remind you to please register yourselves. The link is open, and encourage those in your congregation to do that, especially voting delegates, because information will be sent. And as time goes on, we'll tell you how you can log on and participate fully in the assembly. And next week is the topic of caring for your pastor. And if you're the pastor, caring for yourself. And this is geared toward lay people, and which is why we have 2 options of time. And so next week will happen to be at 7 p.m. So please encourage your lay people to learn about not just caring for the pastor. I know that might sound a little self-serving. Tune in so you can care for me, but caring for each other, being faithful participants in the church all the way. And that's led by Bob and Coletta Eichenberger, who are 2 just precious people in their care and outreach. And Bob is a clinical psychologist, therapist, and Coletta, for a spiritual director. So, and both are clearly aware, and you just feel good being in their company. So we look forward to that. So any other parting words anybody has before we go? Well, thank you, Kirby. Oh, go ahead, Neil.
Just thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, and blessings, and everyone have a terrific day.
Take care. Thank you,
Bye.
Kirby.